I received an impossible phone call from myself 10 years in the past. On the other end of the line, 18-year-old Chloe Winslow's voice was bursting with excitement. 28-year-old Chloe, who did you end up marrying? Was it the gentle and steady Adrian Shaw, or the wild and passionate Brody Shaw? I looked down at the scar left by my missing finger and let out a soft, bitter laugh. Neither. The other end went dead silent for a moment. You're lying. Adrian said he would protect me for the rest of my life, and Brody said he'd destroy anyone who ever dared to cross me. I closed my eyes tightly. Later on, they were the very ones who destroyed you. They both fell in love with Daisy Sutton, the daughter of our live-in housekeeper. To clear her way into the Winslow family, they murdered Dad. To make her happy, they burned down the Winslow estate. In that fire, you lost your beautiful right eye. The 18-year-old Chloe on the phone clearly panicked. How is that even possible? I gripped my phone, using every last ounce of my strength to speak. Chloe, don't choose either of them. Run as far away as you can. This time, don't look back. The call disconnected, and the small diner fell silent again. I lowered my head and continued flipping the burgers on the greasy flat-top grill. My left ring finger was missing a knuckle, making it hard to grip the spatula properly. A customer waiting at the counter tapped his fingers impatiently against the wood. Hey, can you hurry it up? It's just a basic burger. I kept my eyes downcast and murmured softly, coming right up. Once upon a time, Chloe Winslow was the pampered princess of the Winslow family. Adrian used to tell me that my hands were meant for playing the piano, painting masterpieces, and wearing diamonds, not for touching grease and smoke. Brody was different, but just as fierce. If I got a minor splash of hot oil on my skin, he would yell at the chef until the man wept. If anyone looked at me the wrong way, he would sneer coldly, "You want to keep those eyes?" Back then, with one of them on each side of me, I genuinely believed that no one in this world would ever have the heart to let me suffer. But now I ran a tiny, 100-square-foot roadside diner. With a mutilated hand, I served $8 burgers to complete strangers. The man finally lost his patience and spat out a curse. Slow as molasses. No wonder this place is empty. His eyes scanned the right side of my face, lingering briefly on the thick gauze covering my right eye before turning away in disgust. Fucking freak. You shouldn't be out here scaring people at night. I said nothing as my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text from 18-year-old Chloe. Are you lying to me? Adrian just sent me a gorgeous designer gown, and Brody said that no matter who I choose at the engagement party tonight, he'll always protect me. They still seem to love me so much. Looking at those lines, my fingertips went completely numb. I used to believe them too. I believed in Adrian's eternal gentleness and Brody's fierce favoritism. But later, Adrian used that same gentle voice to force me into signing over all my Winslow equity. And Brody took the very hand that had once taken a blade for me and personally hacked off my ring finger. They told me, Chloe, Daisy grew up with absolutely nothing. You've already had so much in life. Why can't you just let her win for once? I closed my eyes. I had listened to those exact words for 7 years. Yielding a dress, yielding my bedroom, yielding my mother's ring. I kept giving things up until I almost gave up my very life. Just as I was about to type a reply, the bell above the door jingled. A man wearing a dark jacket walked in. Hey, can I get a burger to go? As I bent down to grab a fresh patty, he suddenly spoke up, hesitating. Chloe? Is that really you? His gaze fell upon the bandage over my right eye, then slid down to my severed finger. His voice turned into a mixture of awkwardness and pity. How did you end up flipping burgers here? I recognized him as someone from my old social circle who had attended my 18th birthday party a decade ago. I slid the wrapped burger across the counter toward him, my voice completely flat. Everyone has to make a living. He blinked, clearly not expecting such a blunt response. He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and then seemed to remember something. By the way, Adrian Shaw and Brody Shaw are back in Bayview. Did you hear? The cloth in my hand paused against the counter. No. The man stared at me, looking as if he regretted bringing it up, but since the words were out, he forged ahead. Word is Daisy Sutton is pregnant. Adrian and Brody both accompanied her to her prenatal checkup, and the entourage they brought was massive. He paused, glancing at me cautiously. If you had just chosen one of them back then, you wouldn't have ended up. He didn't finish the sentence. He probably caught sight of the gauze on my eye and my mutilated finger and realized that speaking further would be cruel. I simply offered a faint smile. Enjoy your meal. The man lowered his head and stopped talking. I turned around to clean up the back kitchen. An old photograph hung on the wall. In it, my 18-year-old self wore a pristine white dress, standing in the lush gardens of the Winslow estate. Dad stood right behind me, while Adrian and Brody flanked my sides like loyal guardians. Back then, I was radiant, laughing as if I had never seen a single cloud in the sky. A corner of the photo was blackened by smoke. It was the only thing I had managed to salvage when the Winslow estate burned to the ground, the very thing I had clutched desperately to my chest the day I lost my right eye. My phone buzzed again with another message from my 18-year-old self. They've arrived to pick me up for the engagement party. Can I really not trust them? Staring at the text, my heart felt as though it were being violently squeezed by an invisible hand. Right then, the doorbell jingled once more. Out in the rainy night, two men walked into the diner under a shared black umbrella. One carried himself with an effortless, polished elegance, while the other radiated a raw, dangerous arrogance. 10 years had passed, yet Adrian and Brody remained as sharp and immaculate as ever, as though time had refused to leave a single scratch on them. But the moment their eyes landed on me, they both froze. Brody spoke first, his brow furrowing into a deep, harsh line. Chloe? How the hell did you let yourself end up like this? Adrian's gaze drifted to the red, blistered skin on the back of my hand from a recent grease splash, and then settled on my missing ring finger, his voice dropping an octave. All these years, you've been surviving by flipping burgers? I didn't answer. Instead, I placed my phone face down on the counter. But the screen flashed bright, and the text from 18-year-old Chloe burned through the glass. Can I really not trust them? The rising steam from the grill blurred my remaining eye as I forced a small smile. It's a good life. Brody looked as though he had just heard something entirely absurd, his scowl deepening. A good life? Chloe, look at yourself. Brody had always been like this, except back then. His wrath was reserved for anyone who crossed me. Anyone who messes with Chloe messes with me, he used to yell. Later, his fury redirected entirely at me. Chloe, can you stop targeting Daisy? She grew up with nothing and has suffered enough. Would it kill you to just let her have this one thing? I lowered my eyes, slowly wiping away a stray smudge of grease on the counter. Adrian looked at me, his voice a stark, gentle contrast to Brody's rough edge. We never expected things to turn out the way they did back then. My hand stopped moving. How effortlessly those words slipped past his lips. Yet, that night was the exact catalyst for the decade-long nightmare that followed. At the engagement party that year, Daisy had showed up wearing my custom gown. She stood timidly between Adrian and Brody, her eyes brimming with tears as she whispered, Chloe, I've never worn such a beautiful dress in my life. I just wanted to try it on. My face had instantly turned to ice. Take it off. She clutched the fabric, her tears flowing faster, but she didn't budge an inch. I let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. You steal my property and play the victim? The moment the words left my mouth, I brought my hand down and slapped Daisy hard across the face. In the next second, Brody fiercely gripped my wrist. Chloe, have you lost your mind? Adrian looked down at Daisy's swelling cheek, his voice turning freezing cold. Chloe, apologize. Now. Brody's expression worsened as he shoved me backward with immense force. I slammed hard against the sharp edge of a table, turning pale from the agonizing pain. But he didn't reach out to catch me. Instead, he merely snarled, we spoiled you, Chloe, but not so you could bully helpless people. So that night, I stood in a dark corner wearing a plain, backup dress. Meanwhile, Daisy wore my gown, flanked by my protectors, looking like the undisputed princess of the ballroom. That was the very first time they had ever reprimanded me. It was also the day I realized their promises of lifelong protection vanished the exact second Daisy started to cry. Later on, Daisy took a liking to my bedroom, so I was forced to pack up and move to the guest room. She wanted to use my music room, so my grand piano was hauled away and handed over to her. She even envied the heirloom ruby ring my mother had left me, the one my mother had placed on my finger herself on her deathbed. Because I refused to take it off, Daisy wept through the entire night. The very next morning, Brody cornered me and grabbed my wrist. "Chloe, when did you become so damn petty?" One held me down while the other violently ripped the ring from my finger. The metal scraped my knuckle raw, sending blood dripping down the back of my hand. When Daisy slid the ring onto her own finger, her smile was sickeningly sweet. "You're not mad at me, right, Chloe?" Of course I was furious, but everyone around us simply thought I was being immature. Dad was still alive back then, and he flew into a rage at Adrian and Brody for the first time. "The Winslow family took you boys in so you could protect Chloe, not so you could help a housekeeper's daughter bully her." Adrian lowered his eyes, remaining silent. Brody, however, snapped back at Dad for the first time in his life. "Mr. Winslow, Daisy might be the housekeeper's daughter, but what gives you the right to constantly throw her background in her face?" From that exact day, the Winslow family began to crumble. Our corporate projects were mysteriously sabotaged, and the brakes on Dad's car suddenly failed in the middle of the night. He fought for his life in the ICU for a full day and night before leaving me forever. While I was shaking and sobbing uncontrollably, Adrian brought over an equity trust agreement. "Chloe, you're in no state to handle this. Leave the Winslow empire to me." When I refused to sign, Brody cornered me in the study. "Are you determined to drag the entire family company into the ground? Daisy is just trying to help you. Why do you always have to assume the absolute worst of people?" The night they forced me to sign, Daisy walked into the room carrying a bowl of hot soup. "Chloe, please have some soup." I didn't touch it, yet she suddenly collapsed to the floor on her own. The boiling liquid splashed across her hand, leaving a massive, angry red burn. When Brody burst into the room, the first thing he saw was Daisy trembling and weeping. "Chloe didn't mean to do it. It was my fault. I couldn't hold the bowl steady." The more she defended me, the angrier Brody became. The look he shot me was filled with pure loathing. "Chloe, you disgust me." That was the first time he had ever laid a hand on me, the force of his slap leaving my ears ringing. But what hurt worse was seeing Adrian standing right at the doorway. He didn't stop Brody. He merely frowned and said, "Chloe, apologize." After that, apologizing became my daily routine. When Daisy lost a necklace, I apologized. When Daisy fell down the stairs, I apologized. When Daisy got sick, I apologized. As long as she shed a single tear, the blame fell entirely on me. Until the night the Winslow estate caught fire. Daisy had claimed she wanted to see my mother's old art studio, and when I barred her from entering, she broke in anyway. The fire started directly inside that studio. I charged into the flames to save our last family portrait, the thick smoke blinding me. When a burning wooden beam collapsed, a searing agony ripped through my right eye. The pain nearly caused me to black out, but as I dragged myself out of the inferno, I saw Adrian holding Daisy close. Brody had wrapped his jacket tightly around her. Daisy had suffered nothing more than a minor burn on her hand, yet they glared at me with bloodshot eyes. "Chloe, why did you lock the door? Do you hate Daisy so much that you wanted to burn her alive?" I clutched my bleeding right eye, unable to utter a single syllable. That fire consumed the Winslow estate and destroyed the last remnants of my innocence. But the ultimate absurdity came later. Daisy cried, claiming she was deeply traumatized and demanded that I pay the price. Brody sat in silence for a long time before finally picking up a knife from the table. He said, "Chloe, Daisy just wants one of your fingers. After this, we'll pretend none of this ever happened." I looked at him and suddenly laughed. The hand that had once taken a knife for me now held a blade down against my own fingers. The knife fell. My left ring finger severed completely, rolling onto the floor. I shook violently from the agonizing pain, yet through the roaring in my ears, I heard Daisy let out a soft, satisfied giggle. "See, Chloe? I just wanted you to feel what it's like to lose something precious." As the memories faded, I finally stopped wiping the counter. Adrian and Brody stood before me, one completely silent, the other looking profoundly unsettled. They were likely remembering that night too. Yet 10 years later, they remained clean and immaculate, while I was left with a single eye, a mutilated hand, and a leaking diner. My phone screen lit up again with a text from 18-year-old Chloe. "I see Daisy. She's wearing my dress. Adrian and Brody both said they just wanted to make her happy for once. Is what you said about to begin?" Adrian's smooth voice broke through my thoughts. He looked at me, his tone as gentle as it had always been. "Chloe, Daisy is pregnant. She's been worried about you all these years, and the doctor said she can't handle any stress right now." Brody chimed in, his tone thick with impatience. "So come back with us. Just give Daisy an apology." I laughed out loud. "She set the fire that took my right eye. You personally hacked off my finger. And now you want me to apologize to her?" Brody's face hardened. "How long are you going to hold on to the past?" he snapped coldly. "Daisy is carrying a child right now. Can't you just be the bigger person?" Before I could even formulate a response, he grabbed my wrist tightly and began dragging me toward the door. Adrian stood by the entrance, doing absolutely nothing to stop him. He was always like this. He might not hold the blade himself, but he never failed to permit its descent. When they dragged me into the Shaw mansion, Daisy was lounging on the sofa. She wore a pristine white dress, her hand resting gently over her stomach. The moment she saw me, her eyes welled with tears. "Chloe, you're finally willing to see me." Her eyes darted over my missing eye and my mutilated hand, the corners of her mouth twitching upward in a fleeting smirk. Brody shoved me forward ruthlessly. "Get on your knees and apologize to Daisy." I stood like a statue, refusing to bend. In the next second, he kicked the back of my knees, sending me crashing heavily onto the floor. Daisy looked down at me from her perch on the sofa, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Chloe, I don't actually hold a grudge against you. You were just too proud back then. But in the end, I'm the one who stayed by their side." Tears blurred my vision. Right then, my phone vibrated in my hand with a text from 18-year-old Chloe. "But Adrian and Brody grew up with me. I can't bring myself to do anything that would hurt them." My heart sank like a stone. After everything I had said, the 18-year-old me still refused to believe it. Daisy chuckled softly, slowly extending the tip of her designer shoe toward my face. "If you truly feel sorry, Chloe, get down on your knees and grovel." I knelt on the floor, my knuckles turning white as I clenched my fists. Just as utter despair was about to consume me, the phone screen flashed brightly once more with a final text from the past. "But I'm willing to believe you. If you really are me from 10 years later, then this time, I'm giving my body to you. You choose for me." The world around me suddenly began to warp and distort violently. When I opened my eyes again, I was standing in the middle of the crowded ballroom from my engagement party 10 years ago. My right eye was completely intact, and my left ring finger was perfectly whole. Right in front of me stood Daisy, wearing my custom gown, looking frail and innocent between Adrian and Brody. I looked down at my flawless hands and let out a sudden, cold laugh. Then, I raised my hand and signaled the security team directly. "Take Daisy Sutton to the locker room and strip that dress off her back. If there's even a single scratch on it, sue her for damages." Daisy's face turned instantly pale. Brody lunged forward and gripped my wrist. "Chloe, have you lost your mind?" I swung my free hand back and slapped him hard across the face. "Who gave you permission to touch me?" I stared at them both with lethal coldness. "The Winslow family has funded your lives up to this day, and it wasn't so you could help a housekeeper's daughter steal my property." I pulled out my phone and dialed Dad's number immediately. "Dad, effective immediately, Adrian Shaw and Brody Shaw are banned from the Winslow estate. Terminate every single project the family is funding for them. As for Daisy Sutton and her mother, fire them right now." Daisy began to sob, shaking her head violently. "Chloe, please, I didn't. Don't call my name," I cut her off, my voice sharp as ice. "Your mother is a hired hand in our house. You are not a Winslow, and you sure as hell aren't my sister." I turned my freezing gaze back to Adrian and Brody. "From this day forward, I am choosing neither of you. Get the hell out of my life." A suffocating, deathly silence descended upon the grand ballroom as every guest stared at me in shock. As security dragged Daisy toward the changing rooms, her desperate wails echoed through the hall. Adrian! Brody! Save me! In my past life, a single cry like that would make Adrian frown and Brody fly into a rage, turning everyone against me. But this time, the guards didn't slow down for a second. The moment Brody tried to give chase, a wall of burly Winslow security officers stepped in, completely blocking his path. His expression contorted with pure rage. Chloe, you're taking this way too far. I looked at him, offering a venomous smirk. Brody, did you forget? This is the Winslow estate, not your house. He froze in his tracks. Adrian finally spoke up. His voice dropped to a low, smooth cadence. Chloe, the guests are all watching. Staging a scene like this will only embarrass your father. He was still exactly the same, always gentle, always proper, always standing in the safest spot, while letting others do the dirty work. I sneered directly in his face. Adrian, stop using my dad to pressure me. You don't deserve to breathe his name. Adrian's face drained of color instantly. Right then, the heavy double doors of the ballroom swung open, and Dad rushed inside. He took one look at me standing there completely unharmed and let out a massive sigh of relief. Then his gaze shifted to Adrian and Brody being held back by security, and finally to Daisy, who was being marched out in her old, ragged clothes, her hair a total mess from crying. Dad's expression darkened instantly. What's going on here? I walked over and wrapped my arm securely around his. Dad, Daisy stole my custom gown. Dad looked down at me. In my past life, I had always been terrified of him thinking I was being spoiled or difficult, so I swallowed every ounce of misery in silence. But this time, I wasn't going to endure a damn thing. I was going to complain, and I was going to do it loudly. I was the daughter of the Winslow family, and if I was wronged, I had a father who would back me. Dad reached out and gently patted my head. If Chloe doesn't want to give it up, she doesn't have to. Daisy's sobbing caught in her throat, and Brody stiffened completely. Dad turned to face them, his voice dropping to a terrifying chill. The Winslow family provided for you boys because Chloe liked having you around, not so you could turn around and bully my daughter. Adrian lowered his eyes. Mr. Winslow, we didn't handle this properly, but Daisy truly just wanted to try the dress on. I let out a mocking laugh. Just wanted to try it on? I turned to the nearest guard. Bring me her purse. Daisy snapped her head up, her face turning translucent with terror. No, don't. Her reaction was so explosive that every eye in the room locked onto her. The guard quickly handed over her bag, and I flipped it open, dumping the contents out. Along with some lipstick and tissues, a brilliant heirloom ruby ring clattered onto the table. It was my mother's ring. In my past life, the nightmare had started with this exact ring when Daisy claimed she loved it and cried until Brody pinned me down so Adrian could violently tear it off. In this life, she hadn't even had the chance to put on that performance before secretly slipping it into her bag. I held the ring up high, my voice incredibly light. Was this just trying it on too? A collective gasp rippled through the elite crowd. Daisy shook her head wildly, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't me. Chloe, I swear I don't know how that got in there. Brody's brow furrowed tightly, but this time, he didn't instantly leap to her defense. The evidence was too damning. She was caught wearing my dress with my mother's ring hidden in her purse. No amount of tears could mask blatant grand larceny. Dad was shaking with pure rage. Call the police. Daisy completely lost her mind, throwing herself onto her knees. Mr. Winslow, I'm sorry. I just wanted to be Chloe so badly. She has everything, and I have absolutely nothing. I stared down at her. I had heard that exact excuse far too many times in my past life. She didn't have a dress, so I had yield. She didn't have a room, so I had to yield. She didn't have parents to love her, so I was expected to hand over my mother's dying wish. Your poverty is your problem, I said coldly. Not my fault, and certainly not my responsibility. Daisy's cries choked in her throat. I turned my attention to her mother. And you. The Winslow family hired you to manage the house, not to raise a thief. Effective immediately, both of you are terminated. The police will handle the theft. The older woman turned deathly pale, crawling toward Dad to beg. Mr. Winslow, Daisy is still so young. A felony record will ruin her entire life. Dad let out a cold, merciless scoff. My daughter is only 18 too. Why should she clear a path for your thief of a daughter? Hearing those words, a sudden wave of warmth rushed to my eyes. I had waited a lifetime to finally understand that the people who truly love you will never demand that you keep backing down. Adrian finally realized the entire situation had spiraled completely out of control and stepped forward. Mr. Winslow, involving the police, will destroy Daisy. Dad stared at him. And? Is destroying her supposed to be worse than destroying my Chloe? Adrian fell utterly silent, and Brody's face turned completely white. They were realizing for the very first time that the moment they chose to stand by Daisy, they forfeited any right to stand with the Winslow family. Dad turned to his assistant and began issuing orders on the spot. Every single project under Adrian's name was to have Winslow funding pulled immediately. Brody's racing club sponsorship was cancelled effective tonight. The luxury villas they lived in, the sports cars they drove, and every corporate resource tied to the Winslow name were to be revoked before morning. Brody gritted his teeth, glaring at me. Chloe, are you seriously going to push us to the brink? I smiled faintly. Brody, you two chose Daisy first. I'm just letting you live with it. Adrian looked at me, a profound panic flashing deep within his eyes. Chloe, we grew up together. You can't throw away a lifetime of history just because you're angry right now. I stared at him, suddenly remembering how gentle he had looked in my past life when he handed me the equity paperwork, telling me it was for my own good. It was only after the Winslow empire was entirely drained and Dad died in agony that I realized his gentleness was merely a velvet sheath for a deadly blade. I took a step back. Adrian, the moment you let Daisy put on my dress, our history died. Daisy was practically hyperventilating as the police marched her out of the estate. She kept thrashing around, looking back at Adrian and Brody, but neither of them could move a muscle to save her with security blocking them and Dad standing guard. From this moment on, I was no longer the foolish Chloe who would soften her heart over a few pretty words. Once the ballroom emptied out, Dad walked me up to my room and stood by the door, remaining silent for a long time. Chloe, did they make you suffer a lot before this? My nose stung with sudden tears. In my past life, when he finally asked me that question, he was lying on a freezing hospital bed, his hands so cold that no matter how tightly I held them, I couldn't warm them up. But in this life, he was standing tall and strong right in front of me. I threw myself into his arms, hugging him tightly. Dad, don't ever trust them again. Adrian and Brody are monsters. Dad gently stroked my back. All right. I believe you. I closed my eyes, a profound peace washing over me as I realized I had finally saved the most important person in my life. By the next morning, news of Daisy's arrest for grand larceny spread like wildfire through our elite social circle. Her usual routine of playing the helpless victim failed completely because the physical evidence was undeniable. No one dared to claim she was just envious, and no one dared to call me petty. Adrian and Brody spent 3 solid days camping outside the Winslow gates. At first, they kept up their arrogant facade. Chloe, let me in. Brody barked into the intercom. Chloe, we need to talk, Adrian pleaded. But the heavy iron gates of the Winslow estate remained tightly shut. By the 4th day, the financial foundation of the Shaw's flagship project completely imploded, and debt collectors swarmed Brody's racing club. Completely stripped of their pride, they finally called my personal line, and I picked up ______. Adrian's voice sounded incredibly hollow on the other end. Chloe, we were wrong. Can you please ask your dad to restore the funding for the project? Brody frantically snatched the phone away. Chloe, I'm begging you. I don't give a damn about Daisy anymore. Just don't ruin us like this. Listening to their desperate pleas, I found the entire situation deeply hysterical. In my past life, when I knelt at their feet, sobbing and begging them to spare the Winslow family, how had they responded? Adrian had told me, Chloe, things have already reached this point. You need to accept your fate. Brody had said, even if the Winslow empire is gone, you still have us. Yet in the end, they stripped me of everything, including themselves. Adrian, Brody, I said softly, my voice filled with mocking calm. It's time for you to accept your fate. With that, I ended the call. My phone screen flickered violently for a split second, and the strange number from 10 years in the future flashed across the glass one last time with a final text. Thank you. Dad is alive. The family is safe. And I finally don't have to hurt anymore. As I stared at the text, a single tear slipped down my cheek and splashed onto the screen. Within seconds, the message vanished into thin air, signaling that the painful, bloody road of my past life had been permanently severed. I wiped my eyes and looked out the grand windows of my bedroom. The morning sun was brilliant, and my 18-year-old self was standing in the brightest season of her life, with 2 perfect eyes and 10 flawless fingers. Downstairs, Dad's voice echoed up the stairwell, calling me down for breakfast, and the Winslow estate stood grand and untouched by fire. In this lifetime, I would never choose Adrian, and I would never choose Brody. I would only ever choose myself. I assumed that by expelling them from the Winslow family, the nightmare of my past life would be entirely eradicated. But on the 5th day after the engagement party, while I was sitting in the study, helping Dad review some corporate contracts, my phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. Miss Winslow, your father is scheduled to visit the South Bay project site at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Do not let him ride in the black Maybach. My fingertips went completely rigid. The South Bay project. The black Maybach. In my past life, that exact trip was where Dad met his fatal accident when the brakes mysteriously failed, sending the vehicle plunging through the guardrails and off the overpass. He survived for just 24 hours in the ICU, leaving me with nothing but a final, breathless whisper, "Chloe, you have to survive." In an instant, my blood went ice cold. Noticing my sudden paleness, Dad frowned with concern. "Chloe, what's wrong?" I bolted upright from my chair. "Dad, don't go to South Bay today." Dad blinked in surprise. "There's a critical issue at the construction site. I have to oversee it personally." My voice shook uncontrollably as I gripped his sleeve. "The car is compromised." Dad's expression turned dead serious. "How could you possibly know that?" I couldn't explain the existence of a timeline from 10 years into the future, so I simply held on to him with a white-knuckled grip. "Dad, just trust me this once. Please." Looking at my terror-stricken face, Dad remained silent for a few seconds before finally nodding his head. "All right." Right then, his assistant pushed the study doors open. "Mr. Winslow, the car is ready downstairs. Adrian Shaw has already arrived at the South Bay site and says the project blueprints require your personal signature immediately." Adrian Shaw. My chest tightened violently. It was the exact same trap as my past life. Dad hadn't intended to go originally, but Adrian had called claiming there was an emergency that required his presence. Back then, I had even encouraged Dad to go, telling him that Adrian was always responsible and must have a valid reason. And because of that, Dad never came back. Not this time. I pulled out my phone and dialed the head of the Winslow private security detail directly. "Lock down the underground garage immediately. No one is to step within 10 feet of the black Maybach. Get a certified mechanic to inspect the vehicle right now." The assistant's face shifted with unease. "Miss Winslow, isn't this a massive overreaction?" I turned a lethal glare onto him. "If the car is fine, I will personally apologize. But if there is a problem, anyone who tries to stop me right now is an accomplice to murder." The assistant shut his mouth instantly. 10 minutes later, the security captain called back. His voice dropped to a tense whisper. "Miss Winslow, the brake lines have been deliberately sliced. The cut is incredibly fine. It wouldn't show under normal driving conditions, but the moment the car hits highway speeds, the brakes would fail completely." Dad's face turned absolutely murderous, and my palms broke out in a cold sweat. We had been seconds away from a complete repetition of the tragedy. Dad snatched the phone from my hand, his voice vibrating with absolute fury. "Call the police and pull every camera feed in the building. Don't let a single soul leave." Before the authorities could even arrive on the scene, a security guard burst into the room with an urgent update. "Sir, a fire just broke out in the surveillance control room. Someone is trying to incinerate the hard drives." Panic flared in my chest, and I sprinted out of the room instantly with Dad screaming my name behind me. I didn't stop for a single breath. In my past life, I had been too late for everything, but in this life, I refused to be a second too slow. When I reached the security hub, thick black smoke was already pouring through the cracks of the door, and the guards were preparing to ram it open. I covered my nose and mouth, shouting over the chaos. "Cut the power to the wing first. Go through the side exit and cut off their escape route." Within minutes, the guards dragged a choking, ash-covered man out into the corridor. The man's face was smeared with soot, and his hand still gripped a half-empty jug of gasoline. I recognized him instantly. He was a distant nephew of Daisy's mother. In my past life, shortly after Dad's fatal crash, this exact man had suddenly fled the city with a massive influx of cash, a detail I hadn't thought twice about back then. Now, every single piece of the puzzle clicked perfectly into place. The guards pinned him ruthlessly to the floor, but he thrashed around, screaming desperately. "I didn't do anything. Mr. Shaw told me to come fetch some files." The entire corridor went completely silent at his words. By the time Dad arrived, his face was so dark it looked like a thundercloud, and I finally let my tears fall as I clung to him. "Dad, they really wanted to kill you." Dad looked down at me, his eyes filled with a profound, lingering terror rather than shock. He reached out, wrapping his arms securely around me. "Chloe, I believe you." The police arrived shortly after and took the arsonist into custody. Although a portion of the physical surveillance drives had been scorched, I had already instructed the security team to back up every single feed to our private cloud server beforehand. The digital footage clearly showed Adrian's personal assistant escorting the man into the private garage, while Daisy's mother handed him a thick envelope in the stairwell. The evidence of a conspiracy to commit murder was flawless. On the day Adrian and Brody were formally processed by the police, Dad and I walked into the station together. Separated by a thick pane of glass, Adrian's flawless composure was completely shattered, his voice cracking as he looked at me. "Chloe, this is all a massive misunderstanding." Brody, however, glared at me with absolute terror leaking from his eyes. "Chloe, you knew all along, didn't you?" I looked at them through the glass and let out a soft laugh. "Yes, I knew. I knew you would try to murder my father. I knew you would tear the Winslow family apart, and I knew you would eventually stomp me into the dirt." Adrian's face turned paper white. "What the hell are you talking about?" I offered no explanation, leaning in close to the glass to deliver my words with absolute finality. "In my past life, I failed to save my father. In this life, you won't touch a single hair on his head." Brody slammed his hands against the glass, screaming, "Chloe," but the officers pinned him back into his chair instantly. I turned on my heel and walked out of the room, leaving his desperate, echoing shrieks behind me. "Chloe, come back here." I didn't look back. My father was alive, our empire was secure, and every ounce of misery that was meant for me was finally charting a course straight back to them. Over the following weeks, the police uncovered every single fraudulent trade, embezzlement scheme, and corporate crime Adrian and Brody had committed under the Winslow name over the years. Piece by piece, their entire lives were stripped raw in a court of law. Adrian could no longer maintain his gentlemanly facade, his eyes completely bloodshot as he stared at me from the defense table. "Chloe, I only did it because I was terrified of losing you." I smiled faintly at him. "The only thing you were terrified of losing was the power the Winslow family handed to you." Brody received an even harsher sentence for his direct involvement, staring at me with pure venom, before he was led away in handcuffs. "Chloe, if Daisy had never shown up, we would never have become like this." I didn't bother responding because he died without ever understanding the truth. It wasn't Daisy who destroyed them. They were entirely rotten from the inside out. As for Daisy, the charges of grand larceny, conspiracy, attempted arson, and attempted murder left her with absolutely no escape. She wept bitterly in front of the judge, repeating that she was simply envious of my life, but the court cared nothing for her tears as they handed down her sentence. Her mother was convicted as an accessory, with every hidden trace of their sabotage inside our home brought to light as state evidence. On the day of the final sentencing, Daisy locked eyes with me across the crowded courtroom. She had grown dangerously emaciated, the old arrogance completely drained from her hollow face. "Chloe, I was wrong. Please." I stared back at her with absolute indifference. "Don't call my name. I don't have a sister like you." Eventually, the names of Adrian Shaw and Brody Shaw vanished entirely from the high society of Bayview. Daisy spent her days inside a state penitentiary completely unhinged, screaming to the bare walls that she was the true heiress of the Winslow fortune. Meanwhile, I remained by Dad's side, managing the Winslow empire with absolute precision. Inside the grand estate that had been spared from the flames, spring arrived on schedule, covering the gardens in a sea of brilliant blossoms. Standing in the warm sunlight, I looked down at my flawless, unbroken hands, remembering the broken woman who had spent her nights flipping burgers in a leaking diner. I slowly closed my hand into a tight fist. In this lifetime, I was finally done hurting. The end.
This is Listening Novel. We appreciate you spending your time with us. If you enjoyed today's story, please like and subscribe for more stories and stay tuned for what's next.